Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving deep into Plato's Ion, a dialogue that grapples with a fundamental question about artistic talent.
Oh yeah, definitely a question that's it's a question that's as relevant today as it was back then. Where does artistic talent come from?
Is this something you can learn, or is there something
Yeah,
more divine at play?
that's the big question, isn't it? And it's an ion is such a fascinating way to explore that.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to set the scene for our listeners, Plato takes us to ancient Epidaurus, a city that's abuzz with a festival dedicated to the god Asclepius.
And it's not just any festival. Imagine rhapsodes. These are performers who specialize in reciting epic poetry,
Uh,
particularly Homer. We're
oh,
all competing for glory. It's like a poetry slam, ancient Greece style.
I love that, a poetry slam in ancient
Yeah.
Greece style.
Yeah.
So in this competitive arena, we have Ion, a rhapsode who's not exactly shy about his talent.
Oh, no, not at all. He's very confident.
Especially when it comes to Homer. He's convinced that his skill comes from this deep knowledge and understanding of the epics.
But here comes the twist. Enter Socrates, the master of questioning, right?
Of course.
Always got to bring in Socrates. And he throws a bit of a wrench into Ion's confident claims.
He's not quite buying Ion's explanation.
Not really. He's got that playful but probing approach, and he's not letting Ion off easy.
So how does he challenge Ion?
Well, he uses a series of analogies, right?
Yeah.
He compares rhapsodes to charioteers, doctors, other skilled professionals.
Oh, interesting.
It's like he's saying, look, if you're such an expert on Homer, shouldn't you be able to apply that expertise to other poets as well?
Right, like why just Homer?
Yeah, exactly. But Ion insists that his ability is unique to Homer. It doesn't translate. He's stumped as to why, though.
So then how does Socrates explain this contradiction?
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Socrates introduces this idea of the magnetic power of inspiration.
Okay.
He compares the muse, the source of artistic inspiration, right, to a powerful magnet.
A magnet. How does that explain artistic inspiration?
Okay, so picture this. You've got a magnet, and it's attracting a chain of iron rings. Each ring is drawn to the one before it, ultimately leading back to the source, the magnet.
Okay, I'm seeing it.
So Socrates is arguing that the muse works in a similar way. It inspires poets first, and then that inspiration flows down a chain, reaching rhapsodes like Ion.
So he's not speaking from his own knowledge, but from this kind of secondhand inspiration.
Exactly. It's a pretty radical concept when you think about it.
It really is.
And Socrates takes it even further. He draws a parallel between inspired poets and Corybantian revelers.
Those are the worshippers of the goddess Sibyl, right? The ones who
Yeah.
work themselves into an ecstatic frenzy.
Yeah, those guys, music, dancing, the whole nine yards. Socrates is suggesting that artistic creation might be a similar kind of experience.
Like an out-of-body experience.
Almost. Where the poet becomes a conduit for the divine?
Wow, so the poet is like channeling a power beyond their control.
That's the idea. And to really drive home this point, he uses this vivid imagery. He talks about poets drawing songs from honeyed fountains and gardens and dells of the muses.
That's beautiful imagery.
It is, and it really highlights the connection between nature and inspiration.
Makes you wonder if any of us could create great art if we were touched by the divine in that way.
Right. Is it about the person, or is it about that spark of inspiration? And to answer that question, Socrates shares a story.
Okay, a story. I love stories.
This one's about Tynnichus, a poet from Chalcis.
Okay.
Now, Tynnichus wasn't known for being a particularly skilled poet,
Really?
but he did compose one incredibly beautiful and famous paean. It was a hit.
So was this like a fluke, a one-hit wonder of ancient Greece?
Well, Tynnichus himself claimed that it was a result of divine inspiration. And Socrates uses this example to argue that even a bad poet can be a vessel for the muse.
So it's not necessarily about talent or skill. It's about this mysterious force of inspiration.
That seems to be what Socrates is getting at. And we start to see Ion questioning his own beliefs a bit at this point.
He does. He's still holding on to the idea of his expertise. But there's a shift happening.
Definitely. He's starting to acknowledge the power of divine inspiration.
But Socrates, being Socrates, doesn't let up.
Oh, no, he keeps pushing.
He wants Ion to really confront the possibility that his gift isn't based solely on knowledge. This is where Ion's description of his performance style becomes really interesting.
Yes. He describes how he gets completely lost in the performance, He feels the emotions of the characters he's portraying.
Give us an example.
He talks about weeping during the tragic scenes, his hair standing on end in moments of horror, his heart pounding.
Wow, he's really into it.
Totally. It's a very vivid description. And Socrates brilliantly links this back to his earlier point about the chain of inspiration.
How so?
Well, he's saying the poet is inspired by the muse, right? Then the rhapsode is inspired by the poet, and then the audience is moved by the rhapsode.
So it's this flow of creative energy that connects the divine to the human experience.
Exactly, and that's what gives Ion's performance its power. It's not just words, he's transmitting that divine spark.
It's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you think about it.
It really is. It makes you see art in a whole new light.
Now, I've always been a bit confused by the ending of the dialogue where Socrates compares Ion to Proteus.
Ah, yes, the shape-shifting sea god, known for being elusive and taking on different forms.
Is he saying that Ion is a trickster?
Not necessarily. I think he's highlighting how Ion, throughout their conversation, has taken on these different roles.
Like what?
Expert on Homer, skilled artist, even a potential general. He's trying to defend his point of view.
He's dodging Socrates' questions.
Exactly. And in doing so, he kind of reveals that his understanding of Homer might not be as rooted in knowledge as he initially claimed.
So is Socrates saying that Ion is being dishonest?
That's the final choice he offers Ion. He can admit that maybe he's exaggerated his artistic knowledge, or he can embrace the idea of divine inspiration.
And what does Ion choose?
In the end, he chooses inspiration. He recognizes it as the nobler alternative.
It sounds like Socrates has successfully nudged him towards a new understanding of his own abilities.
He has, and this is just the beginning of our exploration of Ion.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Plato's Ion. In part 1, we left off with Ion choosing inspiration over dishonesty, acknowledging that his connection to Homer might be something more than just knowledge.
It was a pretty significant realization for him, wasn't it?
It really was.
Yeah.
But I think some of our listeners might be wondering, what does this ancient dialogue about, rhapsodes and muses have to do with us living in the 21st century?
That's the thing about these classic works, isn't it? They grapple with these timeless questions, questions about art and inspiration that are just as relevant today as they were back in Plato's time.
Because we're still trying to figure out where creativity comes from.
Exactly. What makes some people so incredibly talented, You think about those times when you're completely absorbed in a creative activity.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you're writing, painting, designing, whatever it is, you get into that flow state and ideas just seem to come out of nowhere.
It's almost like you're tapping into some hidden source.
Right. And that's what I think Socrates is hinting at in Ion. Maybe those moments of creative brilliance aren't just, a product of our conscious minds.
Like we're being influenced by something bigger than ourselves.
Something we can't fully control or explain. It kind of takes the pressure off in a way.
It does. You don't have to be this perfect creative machine all the time.
Right. It's about being open to those flashes of inspiration, those moments when something else seems to be working through you. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
And it makes you wonder how many different ways that kind of inspiration can manifest in our lives.
Absolutely. It goes way beyond just poetry and music, right?
For sure.
What about scientific discoveries or, those moments of profound insight in your personal life?
Right.
Even acts of courage or compassion. Could those also be seen as forms of inspiration?
That's such an interesting way to think about it. It expands the whole concept.
It does. And going back to Ion for a moment, I'm also struck by how much emphasis Socrates puts on the power of art to move and inspire others.
Oh, yeah. He's really highlighting that connection between the artist and the audience.
It's like a bridge between two different perspectives.
A bridge built with creativity and emotion.
Exactly. And that bridge can be so powerful.
Yeah.
It can change the way we see the world.
It reminds me of that quote, "Art is not what you see, but what you make others see."
I love that. And in the case of Ion, it's not just about seeing, it's about feeling as well. The rhapsode, through his performance, he's evoking this whole spectrum of emotions in his audience.
So they're not just passive listeners.
No way. They become part of that chain of inspiration that Socrates was talking about earlier.
Wow. So we're all connected in a way through this flow of creative energy.
We are. And that's why art can have such a profound impact on us,
It's definitely not just entertainment.
It can be a catalyst for personal growth, for social change, even for spiritual awakening.
It's amazing to think that this dialogue from thousands of years ago can still be so relevant.
It speaks to something fundamental about the human experience, doesn't it? This need to create, to connect, to express ourselves.
Absolutely. Now, there's one thing I've always wondered about this whole idea of divine inspiration. What if someone isn't particularly religious or spiritual? How does that fit in?
That's a great question. I think it gets to the heart of what Socrates is really exploring. Even if you don't believe in muses or gods, you can still appreciate this idea of inspiration as something that comes from outside our usual way of thinking.
Like those aha moments that seem to come out of nowhere.
Exactly. It could be intuition, a sudden flash of insight or connection you make that you hadn't seen before. The source might be mysterious, but the effect is undeniable. It makes you wonder, though, are there certain conditions that foster this kind of inspiration?
Like, can we cultivate it somehow?
Right. Some might say it's about creating space for stillness and reflection,
Okay.
being open to new experiences, surrounding yourself with beauty and nature. But I don't think it's just about passively waiting for the muse to strike.
Right. It takes effort.
Exactly. It's about showing up, doing the work, and being receptive to those moments of creative magic when they arrive.
So what's the key takeaway from Ion? What do you hope our listeners will be thinking about after this deep dive?
I think Ion reminds us that even the most skilled artists, they might be tapping into something beyond their conscious control. It encourages us to be open to the mysteries of creativity, to value inspiration in all its forms, and to appreciate the power of art to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
It's a call to action almost,
Yeah.
to cultivate that receptivity to inspiration and see where it leads us.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it. And there's still more to uncover in Ion.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last two parts really digging into Plato's Ion and this whole idea of divine inspiration as the source of artistic talent.
It's a pretty heady concept, isn't it?
It is, but like with any thought-provoking work, there are always different ways to interpret it.
Oh, definitely. There are always multiple perspectives to consider.
So what are some of the criticisms of Ion? Where do scholars disagree?
Well, one common critique is that Socrates kind of downplays the role of, skill and craftsmanship in art.
He does seem very focused on that divine inspiration.
Right. It's like he's saying that technique doesn't really matter, which, not everyone agrees with.
Because even the most inspired artists have to hone their craft, right?
Absolutely. Talent might be a gift, but you have to nurture it. You have to put in the work.
So how do we reconcile those two things, the divine inspiration and the hard work?
Maybe it's not an either situation. Maybe it's more of a both hand, like a synergy between the two.
So the artist is working with the divine inspiration to create something beautiful.
Exactly. It's a collaboration. Another interesting point of contention is Socrates' portrayal of Ion himself.
He does seem a bit overconfident at times.
A little bit, and maybe not as insightful as he thinks he is.
Not the sharpest tool in the shed.
Some scholars believe that Socrates is actually using Ion as a kind of foil,
A foil? How so?
to make a broader point about the dangers of mistaking eloquence for wisdom.
Because Ion is very eloquent.
He is, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's wise.
So it's a warning to the audience.
In a way, yes, it reminds us to think critically and not just blindly accept what authority figures tell us, even if they sound really convincing.
It's like that saying, question everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another fascinating aspect of Ion is how it connects to this bigger philosophical debate about the nature of knowledge.
Oh yeah, that's a huge theme in Plato's work.
Definitely, Socrates was all about challenging assumptions and searching for truth.
And in Ion, it seems like he's asking what kind of knowledge does art really give us?
Right. Is it objective or is it more subjective and emotional?
I think he's leaning towards the emotional side.
I think so too. He's saying that artistic inspiration gives us this different way of knowing, one that goes beyond logic and reason.
A knowledge that speaks to the heart.
Exactly. Think about a piece of art that's really moved you. It's not just about the technical skill. It's something deeper, something that touches your soul.
I know exactly what you mean.
It's amazing, isn't it, how this ancient text can still spark these kinds of conversations?
It really is. So after exploring all these different interpretations, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from Ion for someone listening today?
Well, I think it encourages us to be more aware of the role of inspiration in our lives,
Those moments of creativity.
Yeah, those moments when we feel connected to something bigger than ourselves.
Like we're tapping into a universal energy.
Exactly. And maybe it also encourages us to be a little more open to the possibility of things we don't fully understand.
To embrace the mystery.
I love that. To embrace the mystery. That's a perfect way to sum up our deep dive into Plato's Ion.
It has been a fascinating journey. And we want to thank all of you for joining us as we explored the mysteries of creativity and artistic inspiration.
We hope you'll continue to ponder these questions and see how they resonate in your own lives.
Until next time, happy diving.